All right, I'm ready when you are.
So I wanted to talk about inward and outward focus. So I first heard those terms. Well, let me back up even further. So I don't know how many years ago, not very many, they changed the name of what we do from public affairs to state communication. And and they also changed the name at the general level. So it used to be the church public affairs department, and then they changed it to the church communication department. And then at some point that trickled down and it became um, coordinating council communication, state communication. And and what they explained at the time of that change was that what had previously been this outward community leader relationship focus of the state communication people was also now going to include inward communication between members of the stake. And and the only way that really manifested itself, I mean, we were already doing social media um, in our stake, and I picked up the printed bulletins. I became the go-to person when there was an announcement that needed to go out to all the Sunday bulletins. And so people were seeing church events like worldwide devotionals and stake events a little more in the promotion. And then at one of the coordinating council communication workshops meetings, there were stakes, especially in the larger urban areas, that were beginning that were creating a second Facebook page. So the stake had two Facebook pages, and one was outward focused, one was inward focused. And a lot of times the outward focus was a Facebook page and the inward focus was a Facebook group. And so as stake members joined the Facebook group, anybody could post, and it was more practical matters, like if somebody had a bed they wanted to sell, or not sell but give away. And so anyway, this whole inward outward focus dualities started to get some traction. And I went to my stake presidency counselor and I said, do you want us to start a second page, a second stake page that's more outward, more inward? Because we were doing like everything on one page. And he thought about it and said no. And I think it was very wise of him and inspired of him to not go for that. Probably because we're a small stake, small towns. There wasn't a lot of content anyway. And the ward pages were doing a really good job, the ward groups, I should say, of dealing with that housekeeping kind of thing. But anyway, it introduced into my mind the concept of inward outward, and that communication people that are serving in that area do both and need to consider both. Okay, now let's move on to the temple open house. So there
Oh,
were,
hold on a second. So the inward outward thing in a sentence or two. So previously, the focus was one or the other, or there was no distinction between inward and outward previously before they made this change.
it was all outward.
So okay, so there was no inward focus. Okay, so now we're going to a transition period where they're saying, oh, we need to also include this inward focus.
Yeah. So it's not just communication between the stake and the community, it's communication within the stake with its members.
And
So, like
why?
every week,
So
go ahead.
what's an example of the lack of inward communication that we had before? Like wards weren't talking to each other, or wards weren't talking to their own members?
Now, the wards had Facebook groups, and they were active and are still active. And they tend to be, I mean, there's, announcements about ward activities, but they tend to be housekeeping in nature. Like so and so is moving, can everybody show up? Or, um, hey, I have this dog house and we don't have a dog. Does anybody want it? Um, I have lemons, extra lemons. Who wants lemons? You know, so the wards do a really good job. Um, the only thing I started doing that I wasn't doing before is once a week I would bring up the state calendar because they talked about the state calendar and how it was part of communication. So I'd bring up the state calendar. I would do any cleanup, like if there were activities on there that I knew had been canceled or that weren't, there were no details or, whatever the problem was, then I would call up the person that had submitted the post to the calendar and say, hey, is this still happening? Can I get more information? Do you want me to send something to the ward bulletins? And then after looking at the state calendar and general activities like satellite broadcasts and that sort of thing, I would send out to all the ward bulletin coordinators the announcements, anything that was general to the stake or the church.
Okay.
And then they could use them or not. Probably 3 or 4 out of the 6 wards used what I sent them. And then others were very selective about what they used. And then others just didn't bother with what I sent them. But that's their prerogative.
All right, so open house.
Okay, so 2023 was, I think, the first year. Well, temple construction has been ramping up for a long time, but it was the first year where there were several open houses and dedications. And I think the temple and communication departments were scrambling a little bit, trying to figure out how to manage that many events. Like they were bringing on new staff and training, and at least the communication department was. I'm sure the temple department.
So Salt Lake. Salt Lake was
Yeah.
for the first time probably trying to coordinate multiple open houses at the same time with some kind of a template.
Yeah. And there were several open houses before us. There was Richmond, Virginia, there was Columbus, Ohio, there was Helena, Montana. And I was watching what they were doing very carefully, and they had very minimal media. They all had Facebook pages, but it was very minimal content, very safe content, very temple church related content, not community. So what we were doing was pretty different. It was very community oriented. We were trying to communicate, this isn't our temple, this is everyone's temple, this is the community's temple. And we were doing pretty good. We weren't posting a lot, but we were doing pretty good. And somehow, I connected with the sister that was doing the social media for a specific temple. I'm just going to say it because it'll be easier. She was doing the social media for the Bentonville temple. And her story goes something like this, where they announced the temple and her immediate thought was, oh, how did she put it? Oh, she had a great phrase. She was so good with words. She still is. But something about how she was going to cover the temple. She was going to draw the saints in to this temple, gather the saints. That was the phrase. I'm going to gather the saints around this temple. So it gets announced, and the thought that comes into her head is, I'm going to gather the saints around this temple. And she lived in the district, and she lived in the town. And so you think about it from the very, very onset, her focus was inward. But I truly believe that she was inspired, that was spiritual guidance that she received in that phrase, I'm going to gather the saints around this temple. So what she started to do was go to all the little towns in this district and dig around and discover who the heritage saints were, um, who knew the stories of the first saints in that town. And she started to do these, it was just a blog in the beginning. She was a blogger. And she would do these historical posts, about how saints came into such and such a town, and the church began to grow in that little town and in that area. And she very detailed with photos and interviews, and it was just exquisite work. And somewhere along the line, she uh, grew it into a Facebook page and an Instagram account. So there were the three vehicles: the blog, the Facebook, the Instagram. So she's posting on all three platforms. Every time she posts, it's all three platforms. And then there's the groundbreaking, and they start construction. And so she lives in the town. So she's taking a lot of pictures. She's a great photographer and posting all of it. And over the months, she generated a crazy following. She always had so many more followers than I did. And she was very focused on metrics. She understood all of that and really followed all of that, which posts were doing better, and it guided her work. And she was very invested, and learned as she went, and just such amazing work. I'm looking at my notes. Now, all of this she's doing personally. And then at some point, the area communication, and she was in communication at the time. But these are all personal accounts that she's created. And at some point, the coordinating council communication people in her area became aware of her and started to give her grief. They didn't like what she was doing, I think because it had never been done before, and they were afraid of it. Like, she had this crazy following, and it's church members, it's inward, right? She's not drawing community people in. It's just all
Well,
the members in that temple district.
well, so sh in their minds, she probably would be considered an influencer, right? She's influencing the saints, and so they're a little nervous about that, I guess. Do you know what the grief was?
Um, just that it was a temple, and the temple department was uncomfortable because they weren't in control of it. The temple department is very, very cautious. The communication department, not so much. I mean, their focus is trying to get the word out. The temple department's focus is sacredness, holiness, image,
Do you know what
keeping things.
do you know what the grief was though? Was it just like you need to stop doing this, or can we ask you questions, or we're gonna sue you, or
They asked her to shut it down,
they asked
and
her
she did.
they asked her to
She
stop?
took it all, yeah, and she took it all offline. And I think it lasted about 2 weeks. And then she was at a meeting and saw one of the area leaders and said, and talked to him and said, "Did you know this is happening and they're doing this to my work?" And he got it turned around, and they let her bring everything back up and keep going. Um, but there was definitely some discomfort with what she was doing. Now, there was a lot of discomfort with what we were doing too.
Well, hold on.
Um,
So the discomfort with hers, because the way you're making it sound right now is that she was presenting the temple in a way that the temple department wasn't comfortable with, or it was just plainly that it was good material that the temple department wasn't producing.
I just think they didn't want any temple to have a Facebook page or an Instagram account.
I see, I see. So just the
And her work was so clean and it was so good and appropriate, um, that it wasn't the quality of the work. I think,
or the messaging. It wasn't bad messaging and it wasn't quality problem. It was simply that it was here's a temple name, whatever the temple name is, and that the temple department did not authorize the use of that temple name.
yeah, it wasn't their platform, their idea. They weren't in control of the content.
That's
And
interesting.
so I think it was kind of driving them crazy.
That's interesting.
Um,
Was that one temple website? I can't remember what it's called. It's like ldstemples.org or whatever.
yeah, Temples of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, and it's got that huge banner on the top that's like, this is not a website of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I mean, it should be. Like whoever that is should be getting paid by the church to maintain that website appropriately because it's a great resource.
Okay,
So,
that website, that company, whatever it is that they're doing, I heard people call them semi-official, like
well,
the church was okay with them,
well,
that they were doing things in such a way that the church was okay with it.
I guarantee. Well, my assumption is that the church is okay with it. Otherwise, they would be sued out of existence. And the fact that there's no advertisements on the web page, to me, suggests that it's somebody who really cares and is probably volunteering their retirement time to maintain this website and be obsessively accurate about everything that could possibly be. So it's probably like this situation, right? Where it would be kind of foolish for the church to shut it down. At the same time, the church is like, this is not a precedent. We don't want anybody else doing this. This is an exception. I'm sure that's kind of the nervous energy that's around it.
Yeah, and whoever's working on that site, I mean, their work grows in volume all the time, right? I mean, they announced 17 temples in October. So, yeah, they're doing great work. And somehow the church is okay and may even be helping them. I don't know. Um, but it was not the case with this friend that was running the media for Bentonville. So, so Bentonville open house was 2 months in advance of ours. So I'm talking to her like every 2 or 3 weeks. We're having phone conversations and we're sharing ideas. And mostly I'm just adopting her ideas. And and as they got closer to their open house, their coordinating council communications said, we're going to take over your accounts and and we're going to let you be a part of the committee that creates content, but you will not be in charge of the committee that creates content. So these are her personal accounts, and the area CC communication people are taking it over. And she was so determined not to offend and stay in good graces and let her efforts continue, that that she would just go along with all these demands.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't like it, but she would go along with it. And so she was doing some of the content creation, and then there were a couple of other people that, like, one was doing reels and the other was doing graphic design, and it was working, not great, but their collaboration was okay and it was working. um and and then they got into their open house. They had a 2 week public open house. We had 3. Okay, this is important to the numbers. They had 2 weeks, we had 3 weeks. And during their VIP week, which was 5 days, this is important too, they had like
Hold on a second.
400. What?
The 2 weeks includes the VIP days, or is that extra?
That's extra. The VIP days are in advance of the public open house.
Oh,
So
right.
they have 5 days of VIP. She said it was so thin. There was hardly any traffic during VIP. And I think their numbers came in at 400, 500 people. So they're getting like 100 people a day.
100
And it's a
people
big
a day
town.
on average for VIP. Holy smokes.
So, and she wasn't in charge of that. There were like other communication people that were handling the VIP week side of it.
Well, from my
And
exposure, that's like its own team, right? Like you're assigned to the VIP week, and your effort is like to get people there for that week. So if that's the way they did it, then those people had either a different strategy or it just wasn't executed very well or something. Because 100 people a day for VIP seems very low.
oh, it was low. It was dismal. And she was so disappointed. Um, okay, so let me move on. So then they get into their 2 weeks. At the end of their 2 weeks, they had like 50,000. I've got these numbers written down somewhere, but I don't have them clear in my head. So I hope I'm getting them ballpark right. So about 50,000 in their public open house. 2 weeks, 50,000.
And we don't do Sundays.
Yeah,
So,
no Sundays.
so that's 12 days. So 4,000 people a day.
And okay, so that's where it ends up. And then our focus, okay, now let's go to our side. We have our first meeting in like February, and the lady from communication department is there, the lady from temple department is there, and everybody that's been called into the effort is there at that meeting. This is communication.
And
And
February,
they talked, what's
February,
that?
February is 8 months before the open house, or no?
Yeah, yeah. And I remember in that meeting they talked about member engagement. That was the term they used. Member engagement. And I remember thinking, yeah, okay. So inward, outward, right? Like we're going to pull in all these VIPs, but we're also going to really communicate to our members so that our members bring people. And every once in a while that phrase would come up as we were having meetings, but there was never any plan behind it. I never I never saw a plan behind it.
Like
And
what's
I know,
the action associated with that phrase?
yeah, like it was like, okay, we need to work on member engagement or remember your member engagement. And I don't know if they just talked to the stake presidents and hope the stake presidents would figure it out. I know that in my stake, I worked with my stake presidency trying to get a few things going. Like we were like, hey, let us do a fifth Sunday presentation. Let us give talks on High Council Sundays. Um, let us do this and this and this. And in the end, they let me give one talk on a Saturday evening session of state conference. That was what they came down on. And I wouldn't think about it too much. I was too engaged in creating content for the social media. But every once in a while I'd think, man, the member engagement, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to be gelling and coming together. And the communication committee, the open house committee over communication, the two people that were running that, their focus was VIP because that's their superpower. They know how to do VIP, and
Right.
they were doing amazing work, talking to VIPs and getting them lined up for VIP week.
So
Okay, so we hit, what's that?
the context behind what you just said is that there were communications people assigned to this project who already had pre-established VIP relationships that they were leveraging. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so their ability to execute on the VIP assignment was probably a little outside the average ability.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So inward, outward, we were definitely like heavy on the outward. The inward, we were like, I just think it wasn't anybody's interest or nobody really knew what to do. I don't know what the problem was. I could just sort of sense when I thought about it, which wasn't often, that um that it wasn't a focus. Okay.
Well,
So we
one of the things that blew my mind about the open house in the middle of the open house that I re took me forever to realize is that it was a huge opportunity to take members of our ward to the open house who had never been to the open house. And I kicked myself that I wasn't thinking about that early enough. That seems like a perfect example of something that should fit squarely in that member engagement. Like stake presidents, go to your bishops and say, I want a list of 10 people who have never been to the temple who you plan on taking to the open house. That seems like a pretty good example of member engagement. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. Like
Okay.
those are the kinds of things that could have happened. And when I talked to the friend in Bentonville, she said that during their 2 weeks of public open house, that it was members and members were bringing non-member friends. Like she would see, I don't know if you saw Virgil Atkinson during our open house, but he was like the poster child for member engagement. He was bringing 2 or 3 groups of people every day. Probably more. He would say more. Um, that he had contacted and set up. So, like, take any day of our open house, he would have a few groups that he was taking through. Now, that was happening in Bentonville all 2 weeks. Like these members were coming with somebody and then going home and bringing somebody else and going home and bringing somebody else and she said it was just members bringing non-members the whole 2 weeks.
Right.
So their member engagement was off the charts. And it all started with this blog and Facebook and Instagram that was focused on member engagement. And she did it so well. She got this huge following. And then the outcome was, member engagement, but they're VIP. I mean, they were like this, we were like this, right? Okay, so
So,
let's go.
sorry. The member engaged. So what she did is considered member engagement because earlier you said, oh, it's inward. So what she did is considered member engagement because she was going to the members and saying, what is your engagement? What is your story with this temple? How do you know or what is your relationship with this temple? And so they'd say, oh, I know the family, I'm a part of the family, and I know the property owner, and we talked about this temple, and we thought there'd never be one. Like that's what you mean by member engagement?
Well, it started with these historical posts, the history of the church in the towns in the district. Um, and
But what's the common thread that they're investing themselves in the story of the temple? Is that
well, I think they could just see themselves in her work, in her content. Like I don't know if I know the science of it real well. I just know she was successful. And all you have to do is look at her numbers, her followers and her metrics.
okay?
I mean, I
Okay.
mean we never touched what she had.
So then,
Okay, so let's not get caught up in that. So let's go back to us. So we're killing it on VIP in the lead up. Member engagement, hazy. And then we hit our VIP week, 4 days. Bentonville had 5, we had 4.
yeah,
4 days, we got 5,000 VIP.
wow.
I'm pretty sure I have that number right. I know it was in the thousands.
So we got there.
We killed it on VIP. And all of the, not all, but a lot of the content that we did was outward focused. Like on our Facebook and our Instagram, it was all the temples in the area and the Sikh faith and the Chinese temple in Marysville. And, you know, it was all this community work and 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 so we just killed it with our VIP days, 4 days. I mean, we had General Thornton, we had did we have an apostle for VIP? I can't
uh,
remember, but we had several 70 and they had lined them up for Tuesday and Wednesday because we had so many VIPs coming. It's like anytime you have a congressman coming, you have to have a 70. I mean, there's like levels of VIP, and if you hit a certain level, they feel like they have to send 70 in.
Yeah. So
And
you describe real quick, what is VIP and what's the difference between VIP and non-VIP?
um well, in the beginning they were being super stingy, right? It's like you know, build your relationship with your community leader, get them there, but you cannot be there. We won't have room. And then as it got closer, the communication committee chairs were like, I mean, they were pushing hard on the temple department, especially. And they were like, anybody can come, anybody. So people were bringing, like, we had a member of our ward bring a farmer friend, you know, who has status in the ag world. But like all the ladies from Quota Club came and you know, the Rotary Club, I mean, the Gridley, the little tiny clubs, you know, they're all going down there. And um, so, so yeah, there were every level of VIP. I mean, if somebody was
So
director of maintenance at the local school district, they were a VIP, right?
yeah, I know a friend who invited his work staff to go, and the way he said it was, "You're going to be on the clock. I'm going to pay you, and it's a VIP invitation to a special event, so we have to go. So we're all going to go." And he has his all his VIP, you know, because they don't know what VIP is. But yeah, I it seemed like anybody with a special invitation could go, not like a generic show up whenever you want, but you know, special invitation. But that the experience was also different, right? Well, how was the experience different?
Well, the experience was very different. Like you had a tour guide and there were beautiful hors d'oeuvres and refreshments afterward in the culture hall at the adjacent stake center. And you walked into that culture hall and they had live music, violin music and piano music, and they had beautiful flower arrangements everywhere and like a living room furniture arrangement on a rug, and then these beautiful big frames with fabric printed with images of Jesus Christ and very fine tuned, very fine tuned for the VIP experience. Um,
And the non-VIP was no tour guide, no explanation whatsoever, no refreshments. Or actually, was there like, no, I don't think there was.
no refreshments.
You got the video in the beginning, you got a non-guided tour, and then after the tour there was no outro, right? After the tour you just got in your car and you left.
Right. Um, yeah. So and the invitations that we had were just gorgeous invitations, big 5x7 in a beautiful envelope,
Embossed.
and and we sent out scads of those, um, and then followed up with phone calls and so on. Okay, so let me go on. I'm not done with numbers. So we get like a few thousand. I think it was 5,000 in 4 days. We kill it. We kill it. And the communication people are there and they're in heaven. And at one point, they had this little, they had one of the rooms in the stake center devoted to like, like volunteers could go in there and have, cheese and crackers, and you could sit and eat your lunch. And one time I was sitting there, and it was the communication department trainee. So she was the younger one. She was in training. She was about to do her very first open house by herself. And I was sitting next to her, and I was always so excited about Bentonville and what this friend was doing. And I started to go on with her, which is insane because she knew. I mean, she knew all about this friend. She knew all about what she was doing and why it was problematic for some people. And so I'm going on and on about, oh, have you seen what so and so is doing with Bentonville social media, what they did, and the beautiful work, photography, blah, 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 blah. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, but don't you think it was kind of inward focused? And I thought, oh my gosh. And that's when it really settled on me, the whole inward outward thing, and where the focus can and can't be, like depending on what people do, and what the outcomes are, and what the communication department wants. They don't care about public open house. As soon as that first day of public open house started, all those people disappeared. All the Salt Lake people disappeared. The two chairs of our communication committee disappeared. They only came back twice. Once for the Catholic bishop, and what was the other one? And once for the area president when he came back. Outside of that, they were nowhere on site. And
So, but okay.
when this communication staff member, Salt Lake, we're talking Salt Lake person, when she said that to me, I'm like, they could care less about member engagement. What they want is VIP. I don't even think they care that much about Joe Schmo non-member. I think they just are so focused on the VIP, which is an important focus. But why not give a little attention to, I mean, why does it have to be one or the other? We were focused on VIP, Bentonville was focused on member engagement, and the outcomes were completely different. Okay, numbers. They had 2 weeks. They got 50,000. I'm talking public open house. We had 3 weeks. We got like 55,000.
Oh, that's not
Do you
too.
see? Do you see the numbers? Like we should have gotten, if we were doing as well as they were, we should have gotten 75,000.
Yeah, but it wasn't dismal. It wasn't 100 a day like they did in VIP. So they did. Um,
It was okay. It wasn't dismal. It was okay. But we definitely did not knock it out of the park. And then
yeah,
um
we didn't get dismal. We didn't knock it out of the park. What's the size of Bentonville compared to Yuba City?
oh, I don't know. I'm looking up something else. Um I'm looking up something else so that you know what I'm talking about.
So, oh, I thought it was gonna. Bentonville is 60,000, which is a little bit smaller than Yuba City, I think. Yuba City is 68. So they're very comparable in size. I'll bet the communities are probably pretty comparable too, like the surrounding communities. I wonder if that's a matter of the community, like the community threshold interest, for a community of 60,000 people to produce 50,000 visitors at an open house is kind of insane. So I wonder if that's just kind of a threshold for the community. Well, I don't know, except you gave us an extra week. So if we would have only had 2 weeks, would our numbers have been half as much or like just barely less? Like that third week, was there a lot of people or was it trailing off?
I'll tell you one thing. The last day of our public open house, we expected it to be kind of a mob scene because it's the last day. You're getting all the people that have procrastinated. It was so thin the
Oh,
last day. Like
okay.
I think everybody was determined to stay off that day and they came earlier.
Well,
But
either
okay, another thing.
okay.
So Moses Lake Temple in Washington State. I think they were right after, but they were really close to our open house. I can't remember before or after. I think they were right after. And and so I'm watching them, and they had a Facebook page. Um, so Moses Lake Temple. I didn't know this, but Moses Lake is kind of a heritage church site. Like I don't know when Latter-day Saints went to that area and settled in that area. I don't know if Brigham Young sent them, but it's pretty thick with Latter-day Saints in the Moses Lake area. And it's like central, eastern, a little bit north Washington. They're this tiny town, 25,000 or something. They got 60,000 at their public open house.
How many weeks?
I think two.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I don't know how to explain that except that there's a lot of members in that area and I think it drew people in from the whole state. Like I know our family members in Yakima went over to it and that's, probably a 3-hour drive or something. And I think they had a Facebook page. It was a nothing burger. There was nothing. Still, Helena, Montana, I think they had like 2 VIP days. It's such a small town, such a small temple. It was the first modular temple. And yeah, every temple's different. But okay, so wrap up. We focused on VIPs and fell short on member engagement, and you could see that in our numbers. My friend in Bentonville focused on member engagement and was less interested in VIPs, and you could see that in their numbers. So I guess one lesson is your outcome will reflect your focus. But the other thing that I think can be learned is why not focus on both?
Well,
Why one at the expense of the other?
I don't know that anybody would be opposed to that, right? Like nobody's saying don't do that. It feels like everybody would love that outcome, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. And so what is the suggestion? Focus on both. Great. So what does that mean? It means you have a VIP team that is really good at that, and that's all they do, and they knock it out of the park. And you have a separate team that doesn't do VIP, that does public open house, and they focus on member engagement, and they knock that out of the park. So you've got the Bentonville public, and you've got the Yuba City VIP, those pseudo teams working together on the next open house project. That seems like a fair suggestion.
Yeah, and maybe not even the same committee is working on both. Like maybe you need a separate membership engagement committee in your open house committee umbrella.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I think there's kind of it's easy to stigmatize the Salt Lake priorities to like, oh, Salt Lake only cares about the global influences, the statutory influences, the VIP weeks. But I would venture to guess that they care just as much about the membership and the public open house time frame. They just haven't been asked to be there for that. They themselves haven't asked to be a part of that because, again, I assume they're assuming that the stake leadership and the ward leaderships are going to knock that out of the park. Like that's just what they're going to do. Salt Lake doesn't have to tell members to care about the temple. We've been telling them that for 200 years. We don't have to go to their wards and say, "Hey, oh, did you guys know we're building a temple in your stake?" Like they should be able to figure that out. What they need help with is the VIP because members are notoriously terrible at going to non-members and being like, "Hey, remember me? I'm LDS. We're doing this weird thing in your neighborhood, and you should probably find out about it because it'd be awesome to go." Like, common members are terrible at that. So it makes sense that Salt Lake would think that they would have to help us with the VIP, but not with the public open house. And I think that the final day of the public open house at Feather River is a reflection of that. I think the final day of the public open house was lean, not because everybody was so good at going up, in advance and not being there last day. And it's not because we finally got all of the public friends that wanted to go. It's because the members were already doing the work for 2 weeks straight or 3 weeks straight. The members were already doing the work for 3 weeks straight. They'd already been to the temple for 3 to 10 times a piece with different friends and different family. And that last day, they're like, I'm done. I don't want to go back. I've done my work. I'm taking a day off. This last day is just let people go on their own. I think that it would be my guess at those numbers and kind of how that might tie into the Salt Lake prioritization of that. Because I think I would bet that if you had Salt Lake come in with their own team of influencers to help member engagement and help the Saints through the 2 to 3 week open house, I don't think you'd get twice the numbers. I think you'd get 5% more, maybe 10% more.
Yeah, I don't know what the solution is. And maybe it's the missionary department that needs to work on member engagement. But like if somebody had just introduced to me, because I remember after the open house thinking, oh man, I should have taken this sister that I minister to that's inactive. Um, I should have taken this family that struggles. I should have, and they could have introduced that to us. I mean, the bishop and ward council could have said, okay, how do we get every member of our ward down there? Who's going to
Exactly.
contact him?
Yeah, exactly. I think
Um,
that's probably the takeaway for me. I mean, I already talked about it, but in terms of like hard suggestions, it would be the people who are in charge have two separate committees that specialize in VIP and public and really focus on those things and knock it out of the park. Get super creative, do your homework, talk to people, trying to figure out exactly how to do that. And one of the byproducts of that will be what we've been talking about, right? If you get better member engagement, then you'll have the stake president holding more meetings with the bishops and the bishops with the ward councils and talking to members like, hey, we're going to do a special meeting. And it could even be a Zoom meeting, so you don't have to go out of your way to attend. And it's just going to be brainstorming like, hey, not the who's, but what's. Like, how do we do this? How are we going to communicate? Who's comfortable making a little video? And really trying to, I guess it'd be democratize the influence rather than being like, here's the temple Facebook page. If you want to post anything, send it to me and I'll see if it's good enough, and then we'll post it on there. So make sure it's all like the same messaging. And that's one of the things that I was realizing last week. When you go online, the detractors of the faith have democratized their influence. There's nobody that's deciding what gets posted and what doesn't. Everybody posts whatever they want to detract from the faith. There's no gatekeepers. And so their influence is massive. It's massive. Not in terms of depth, but in terms of breadth. There's just so many of them, and they're all interested in putting their 2 cents out there. And I think one of the reasons that you don't get a plethora of faithful messages out there is because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong. They're afraid they're gonna be like, here's what it's really like, here's how what I believe, here's what the church is like, here's what's going on. Because they're afraid that some other member is gonna pop them and be like, hey, Den didn't really get it right. He said that it was
Denton, you're frozen.
oh, can you hear me?
There you are.
Sorry. Some member is gonna pop up and say, hey, Denton tried to contribute, but he's wrong. It's not the doctrine and covenants, it's the doctrine and covenant. He pronounced it wrong, whatever. Some stupid little thing. And I think that's one of the things that Salt Lake has created is a membership that is now a little bit frustrated that they've been told how to present their faith in a particular way. And for good reason. I'm not criticizing Salt Lake for the effort. Um, but there's room for reconsidering how we approach the sharing of our faith and inviting members and stuff.
Let me just say to close it up, because I think this is interesting. When the open house ended in Bentonville, the CC communication people told my friend, you have 30 days to wrap it up. And then we're going to take back the accounts. We're going to take them over and we're going to take you off as an admin. And it's just going to be us. And they gave the impression that they would continue to post, photography, nice things. So she did a little 30 days, she posted a little, and then she did a farewell post. And then they took it from her and did a couple of final posts and close the accounts. I mean, there's still everything is still there. All her content is still there, fortunately, but it's out of her control, and they're not posting anything. And just super, super devastating for her.
Including her blog.
I don't know about the blog. I don't think they were ever interested in the blog because the whole blog thing kind of died out, interest in blogs.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. That is pretty sad.
Um, and they started pages like the powers in the CC communication department started pages for the other temples that had been announced, because during that process, a couple of other temples got announced in that area. So they quickly started Facebook pages so that nobody else could. And
Yeah.
I don't know if they're doing that with all the temples. I can't imagine they care enough anymore.
All you have to do is standardize it. So in the temple department, they have a piece of paper that says for every temple that gets announced, these things have to be done in the next 10 minutes. And one of those things on the list is create a Facebook page and an Instagram account with the names of those temples, saying that it's the official site so that nobody can claim it. That's all. It's just the standard. Somewhere in some file, there's the standard. It's on the list, and so it'll just be done for every temple.
And you can't blame them. You can't blame them, especially the temple department. I mean, they're trying to, I mean, all standards are higher when it comes to temples, right? I mean, I did a shift cleaning our temple this morning, and the standard, the cleaning standard for a temple is off the charts. And so it makes sense that that kind of attention and caution would go everywhere when it comes to temples.
Yeah, one thing I've been thinking about lately, and I do believe there's more truth to it than I want to give it credit. I was talking to a guy in our ward that I trust. We were talking about temple work and stuff, and I was like, "Well, why doesn't it work this way? Well, shouldn't it work that way?" And we were kind of playing around with the idea, and he kind of paused and he said, "You just got to think about it for a second. Think about all the things that you've seen in the temple and around temples. Isn't it obvious that Heavenly Father really cares about this topic a lot? He really is in charge of everything that's going on here, and there's really nothing that we can do to mess it up if we're trying to do the right thing. Like we're not going to accidentally like try to invite the right person. We actually invited the wrong person. Like it doesn't work like that. And the more I think about it, the more I think that is true. That you could have an open house and the open house bombs in every respect, and it's a total failure. And the right response to that is, well, we tried. I mean, none of us were sabotaging this thing. Like we really tried our best effort, and God is in charge of this thing. It's not like we're going to fail. We already know the outcome of this whole project, so that's just the way it went. And I think that the more we try, the more we have to be careful not to think that we are the strategy and that we're the program and that we know how to solve God's problems, but that as long as we're open to his solutions, that he'll guide us that way.